Welcome to the TCO19 finals. I'm your host, Nick Castillo, and my co-host over here, Will Price.
Oh, thank you, Nick. It's good to be back. Longest year of my life missing last year's TCO. I'm really
Well, we're all
glad
glad to have you back. We're very excited. This is not our kickoff show. We do, however, have a marathon competition going already, and we wanted to bring you some of that competition, some of the details, maybe give you an insight of some of the problems as well. And that's why we have these two sitting next to us. We have Dimitri and Aaron with us. Dimitri has been a member since 2002. An interesting fact about him is that he has moved from the algo track to the marathon track, and he's also the problem writer of this year's competition. We'll get to that in a little bit. He's very vocal. He loves Top Coder so much. He's on the message boards. You've probably seen him there. Over 4,000 posts. So thank you, Dimitri, for being here.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
We certainly can't forget about Aaron. Aaron is a mainstay at TCO every year, being a veteran problem writer and the coordinator for our marathon matches at TCO, dating back to 2007? Am I correct there?
I've officially been coordinating at TCO since about 2012, maybe?
Okay.
But I've been involved with TCO since 2009.
Well, it wouldn't be TCO without Aaron here helping out with these
For better or
questions.
worse, right?
Very true.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Aaron. Aaron, can you please, for anyone who's new to Top Coder and especially the marathon match, walk us through what a marathon match actually is?
Sure. So a marathon match during the online rounds works a little bit differently than it does on site, but it is a single problem that people work on, and it lasts typically over the course of a week or longer, where you are judged not by pure correct or incorrect, but rather the quality of the output that your solution generates. You're given a problem and you're asked to find perhaps some sort of an optimization or a best possible one that your program can find, and you can keep resubmitting and retrying to improve your score. And then you get ranked on the leaderboard based upon how you do compared with everybody else. Now, of course, on site we don't have a week or more for people to be competing, so it's a single day event, which changes things a bit. It's a 10-hour event on site where competitors just basically sit at their workstation for 10 hours, try to solve a single problem. Something that we've been doing for the past few years is we used to force a lunch and dinner break. We now don't force either of those. However, we bring in boxed lunches for folks. What we were finding used to happen is that people would bring their pens and papers out to the lunch table, would kind of shove some food in for about 3 minutes or so, and then would be begging to go back to their desk and just get back to work. You figure there is $10,000 on the line here, so they're much more interested about what's going on up on stage there than they really care about eating, even. They can eat later, compete now.
And those that are, again, new to the whole marathon, on the site, marathons usually last 7 days?
7 days, sometimes longer, but...
So this is a condensed version.
This is a very, very condensed version of that.
All right, and so now let's move over to Dimitri. Could you explain the problem of what our competitors are working on?
Yeah, sure. So let's have a look at the problem statement.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the problem. You're given a grid, an n by n grid, and you have to place chess pieces from C different players. So the rule is chess pieces from the same player, they can attack each other, but if they're from different players, they can't attack each other. So for example, the king, the yellow king in the corner here, he can still attack the yellow queen, but the pieces from different players, they can't attack each other.
So you'll see that none of the red pieces can attack the yellow pieces and vice versa, but
That's
red
right.
pieces can attack themselves, yellow pieces can attack themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So now let's talk about the scoring. So what we have is you get points for each piece that you've placed. So normally you get more points for important pieces like the queen, the bishop, for example, and you have less points for the king and the knight as well. So each player, each color that you've placed, you get some points for the pieces that you've placed, and then the final score that you get is the score of the lowest scoring player. So essentially what you want to do is kind of balance the scores of different players because you're only getting the score of the lowest scoring player. So in this,
Okay.
So you want to fill out each of the players as optimally as you can compared against each other. If it was just having one player that you were maximizing, it would be way too easy to kind of game it and just not place pieces from everybody else.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so in this example, we have 2 players, the yellow and the red, that score the same lowest score of 83. So that's your final score. You get 83.
Okay, so there are multiple players on the same board. On the same board? Are
Correct.
there-
right.
You have multiple different players that you're placing all on the same board.
Okay.
And in the visualization, if we can take a look at that again, you can see they're represented by the different colors. So in this example shown, there are 4 different players: red, yellow, blue, and magenta. And it actually shows you the score for each of those. The yellow one's a little bit harder to read, but the scores are 84, 93, 83, and 83. So your overall score is the lowest score from any individual player, again forcing you to try to fill in everybody kind of equally and kind of balanced. So the score for this particular output would be a score of 83.
All right.
The variance and what makes the problem interesting is that you can have a different number of players, anywhere from I believe 2 to 8.
2 to 8.
Yeah, please keep me honest if I misspeak on
Yep.
any of this. You can have a chessboard any size from 8 up to 50. And if you saw that some of the squares are grayed out,
Yeah.
those are walls that you can't place anything, and they also block pieces from moving or attacking each other. So it greatly increases the permutations of what you can be dealing with in the problem. And then also the point values for pieces is not static. So each test case that you're going to be facing, and during the initial phase right now, they've got 100 test cases that they're scored against. Each test case is basically a very different problem to solve. So coming up with a solution strategy that works well across a variety of test cases is kind of what makes this interesting. You might come up with a very simple solution that works great on really big boards, but then on a small board that's got a lot of holes in it, becomes a lot harder. Or you might have something where on a small board you can kind of mathematically solve it almost optimally, but then on a much bigger board it's a much larger search space and the chances of solving it optimally are basically impossible. So that's where you get some of the variation and some of what makes it interesting.
Are the walls placed randomly in each test set,
That's
or
right.
is the
They're
test
placed-
set kind of have it static? This test set has walls here, here, and here.
So the walls are placed randomly, and there's a different amount of walls. So the percentage varies from 15% to 65% through each test case. So you might have grids that are almost empty with no walls, and you might use a completely different strategy to a grid that's pretty much full of walls.
Worth noting, though, the test cases that competitors are judged on, it's the same set of test cases for all the competitors. So even though each test is randomly generated, there are a fixed set of 100 random tests that they're doing. So it's not like it's just luck of the draw with the tests either. It is a fair system in that sense.
And we just want to remind our viewers, so here they are given 100 test cases. However, after the competition is finished, it's going to be run through a more rigorous number
Yes.
of tests, correct?
Yeah, a much larger set of tests. I think at least 1,000, if not more.
Yeah, we're hoping for 2,000 tests.
Based upon approximate runtime and how many we think we can cram in. But the idea being by doing more tests, our statistical variation in the score differences tends to go down, and we have a greater confidence in which one is actually the best solution.
You mentioned runtime. Does that affect the score at all?
In this case, it does not. The way it does affect it, though, is there is a time limit. So for each test case, is that 10 seconds per test case?
There's a 10-second.
Yeah, you get 10 seconds of programming to come up with whatever placement of pieces you're going to use. So obviously, if somebody could use, an unlimited amount of computer power for years and years, you could probably come up with a much better solution, but limiting it to 10 seconds does kind of even that out a little bit, and also makes it possible for us to even run this.
It's also worth noting when we talk about the resources available to the competitors that each competitor is on an identical workstation with the exact same amount of computing
Not
power.
exactly the case this year. We
we
have done that in previous years. This year, however, we actually offered the option because we had a couple of competitors that really wanted to use a Mac. But we gave them the heads up that the Macs we have available are actually less powerful than the other workstations that are available. So they did have a little bit of choice there. And even on those workstations, some competitors are using their own custom VMs that they've put together just because they have their environment set up the way they like. So that can give some variation. However, what's important is that the scores on which they are judged are all run on identical virtual machines. So the actual scores that count are identical. The only place where it makes a difference is while they're testing locally, having a bit more efficient environment or a bit more powerful machine, you can do more local tests and have a better idea of how your solution's going to do before you submit it. A problem we've had in previous years, shouldn't be a problem this year, but we used to actually have the desks draped with a cloth, kind of like this one that we've got at our table here, and it would actually clog up the fan intake on the machines, and they would be testing so rigorously for so long that the machines would actually overheat. Fortunately, it's more like a solid foam board now, so that's not a problem anymore, but that was some fun times we've had in years gone by.
Well, that's what you get when you have someone who's been a TCO so frequently
Exactly.
over the years. So, with when someone's using a virtual machine, does that make a noticeable impact on the available resources that they would be using on their test cases? So it's kind of like a strategy decision. Do I want to be more comfortable or have more resources?
So in theory, it does make a difference because obviously you want the sizing of your virtual machine. For anybody who doesn't know about virtual machines, essentially it's a machine within your computer where it's using part of your computer resources as though it were its own computer. So it is going to be a little bit of a performance loss. In most cases, it won't be too bad if you set up your settings properly. But for most competitors, I would say, where the majority of what they're actually doing locally is going to be kind of the coding and the testing, having the environment they're familiar with the OS they like, using the tools they like, is probably going to be a lot more valuable for them than necessarily the resources available locally, which is why we had some competitors opting to use a lower-powered Mac, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, I find that convenience is very important. If you're familiar with the tools and the machine that you have, then you can do things a lot better and
Yeah, for sure.
more easily. Whereas if you have to play around with a new setup, that's going to waste your time and you're going to lose those precious minutes.
And again, this is only a 10-hour event, and the problem is designed in such a way that, as you probably understand, anybody who's even got vague familiarity with how chess works can understand what the problem is this time. It has to be something where they can understand the problem, get into it, and at least get some sort of a solution together within the first hour or two, so that they really have time to work on it. Unlike the week-long contest, they don't have time to sit and muck around. And we've got a few people already that are submitting some stuff where it looks like they're making some progress on it, so...
And now to get a little bit of background on the problem, just to kind of come back to it. So as we mentioned before, typically marathon problems take 7 days. Was there any inspiration to using this type of problem for this kind of time limit?
Yeah, so I wanted to have a problem that's easy to understand, something that you can jump in and start solving. So everyone's familiar with chess and
Right.
And it's kind of visual, you can see what's happening. So I think the rules are simple to understand, you can start solving. So yeah, that was important to me.
That's great.
Yeah.
It also visualizes kind of nicely. It's not an animated visualization like we've had in some years. It is just a static image that you see.
Okay.
But it does look nice on the screen, so for spectators and clients that are coming by, they can kind of see, and just at a glance, you can kind of see what's happening with it. And that makes it a bit more interesting to watch, too.
Yeah, I think you were mentioning something about that earlier. It's like, oh, this is such a great problem because, I kind of understand what's going on.
Yeah,
I may not have the solution,
Yeah.
but...
Oh, I certainly couldn't solve it.
But
realistically, there is no solution. There's really just the best optimization.
true.
There's a perfect solution we are pretty sure is impossible to obtain in any sort of reasonable timeline. That is one of the things we test for a lot, is because we don't want a situation where all or many of the test cases can be solved optimally. Otherwise, we end up in a situation where multiple competitors find a perfect solution. That's no fun.
Yeah.
So we're pretty hopeful, and we did some pretty rigorous testing, had a few different people looking at it.
That's actually a good introduction into kind of... Will you be able to show us some potential approaches to
Yeah, definitely.
this?
Yeah.
Would you need a notepad to write on, or
Yeah, I think.
do you want to just verbally tell us?
Yeah, I think I'll just start verbally.
Okay, cool.
So, probably a very naive, simple approach would be to use something like hill climbing or simulated annealing. So, in hill climbing, you have a set of moves that you can do. So, here you could add a piece, or you can move a piece, remove a piece, or maybe change its color. So each move will change your score, and you probably want to accept the move if it increases your score. And then if you're using simulated kneeling, for example, you might want to also accept a bad move, even if it decreases its score. So once in a while, you might accept a bad move.
To try to fill in a little bit, since I'm getting some inquisical looks from Nick and Will here.
Oh, gee. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so what these kind of solutions do is the idea is you kind of start with a semi-random arrangement of pieces or just a very naive arrangement, and then you randomly make decisions about where maybe you'll move a piece or make a random decision to add another piece onto your board, or just make small random changes and see if those changes are good or bad. Not entirely unlike evolutionary genetic kind of algorithms that sometimes people will do. And the idea is by just randomly trying things to make it better, that's where you get this term hill climbing. Every time you get a little bit higher, you keep it and you try working for the next thing. In the case of simulated annealing, you sort of shake up your solution a bit, and sometimes you accept things that maybe aren't as good, but maybe give you the potential for your next move to be better. So it's sort of a randomized to try to find the best randomization sort of thing. Randomization, but accepting only the successes without the failures.
Oh, that's fantastic. I remember the way our freaking competitor in the past, Saiho, explained it to me on stream one year. He said, "I keep throwing things against the wall, and then I keep the
And you
ones
see
that are
what
good."
sticks.
He was very eloquent like that.
So that, yeah, well, competitors have an interesting language of their own for this kind of stuff because they can spend time explaining what they're doing, or they can spend their time coding up the solution and actually doing it, and the latter is usually a much better use of their time.
I think this is actually a great chance to segue into our competitors a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, all right. Yeah, so this is a great time to talk about competitors. So maybe we can pull up some graphics here.
Yeah, who do
and
we have
highlight
here
Who
this
is here,
year?
now that we know what they're doing.
Alrighty, so it looks, here are our finalists. We have 12. We have 5 of them from Japan. That's the country of majority here. We also have people from Russia, Romania, Georgia, France, Belarus, and Brazil. A couple cool stories here. We have W. Leite. W. Leite is from Brazil. He has been at the Top Coder Open. This is his 11th time,
Wow.
but yet to win a championship. So this could be the year for him. We also have Tourist. Tourist had won last year and won in 2014. He has the the ability, perhaps, to win both marathon and algorithm. He is participating in both. He did that last year as well. We've never had a member win 2 categories, so something to watch out there as well. So how about you guys? You guys have been around these members, throughout the year. What are some of your thoughts?
So
what you see here.
one thing that jumps out to me is you say right away, Japan is the majority country, but if you look at those 5 members, 3 of them are here for the first time. So getting back to the point about how the on-site experience is very different than when you're sitting at home from the comfort of your own couch or your office and you have a week to work on things, it's a very different experience being on site where you have to be able to look at the problem quickly, grok what's going on, and have a very quick idea for what is a good solution, what's going to work, what's not.
Right.
Tourist, who doesn't do as many of the marathons as a lot of some of these other guys, he has that ability. His skills in the algo, he's able to think very quickly and just look at something, and his brain just starts thinking, and you can actually see him doing stuff with his fingers where he's mathematically thinking through the problem and able to do that very quickly and very effectively. Then you balance that against, though, what does experience mean? W. Leite, he's here for the 11th time, and the best he's ever done up until now is 3rd place. If I'm looking at the competitors I see here, he's got more wins in online rounds than anybody else. He's an 11-time TCO finalist, but he has competed in, I want to say, hundreds of marathons during the years, and so he's definitely very, very experienced with this, and he's certainly won a lot of them.
Right.
So you do have to wonder, maybe is this his year to win? If I'm looking at this and I'm making odds, not that I recommend placing wagers on this necessarily, that's not what we're doing, we're not Vegas, but I think the only one in terms of raw skill here who might beat him is Tourist. I think his experience is going to be pretty strong there. But you just never know, because sometimes the randomness of the problem and what any of these competitors may have seen or may have worked on in other parts of their life or may have seen before, maybe they're able to relate this problem to something else they've done before. Sometimes you can get situations where it just happens to be their problem and it really resonates with them, or they have some aha moment and a great insight.
All right. Dimitri, can you explain what we're seeing here?
Yeah, so here we have a head-to-head table. So the numbers indicate the number of times that the row player has beaten the column player.
Okay.
And they're sorted, so we sorted the rows from sort of best to worst. So we can see here that W Light is on top of the game. He's actually beaten everyone else more than anyone.
Essentially, he's beaten other people more than they've beaten him in other contests.
Okay.
So in any random contest, W Latte versus anybody else, your smart money is on W Latte coming out ahead.
Yeah, I think this
By
one...
the numbers, anyway.
Yeah, this one shows all the contests.
Correct.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the more recent contests or more the TCO finals, then the numbers change it a little bit.
It does.
And,
Different types of problems, different types of contests.
That's right. And Tourist, because he's kind of had a late start in marathons, so his early matches weren't so strong, but recently he's become really good, and so he's probably up there with W Light.
Yeah, so don't let the fact that he's 7th in this list fool you.
Yeah.
That's a statistical oddity just because he hasn't competed against a lot of these people head to head very many times. But he certainly can hold his own in this, and I would be surprised if he's not in the top 3.
Yeah. But there's other strong people around here.
I do recognize a lot of the names that we've seen at previous TCOs.
For sure.
We have Nika and Mugarilionut from Belarus.
That's right.
Milanin, very, very familiar names.
Yep, ATS has been here before. Tomarun has been here before. Yeah, we've got a few new folks though too, so that makes it interesting.
Really does. And do you have any thoughts on why we have such a surge of Japanese members in this competition this year?
I actually have no idea. That's a great question. I wasn't prepared for that one. If I were to take a guess, it might be because of various other competitive platforms out there. I'm going to guess that maybe they've surged in a bit of popularity in Japan too. I do know there's one other that is popular in Japan, and I believe they recently started doing a format similar to marathon matches. So I'm going to guess perhaps some Japanese competitors now have more familiarity with the format. Okay. Maybe they just caught interest in it, or perhaps they were just looking for more competitions to do. So they decided, hey, you know what, marathon? It's kind of similar to Algorithm in some ways. Let's try that.
Awesome.
Yeah, the Japanese competitors have long been very successful in Algorithm. I'm not surprised to see them being successful here as well.
That's great. We always love to see people jumping from track to track.
Absolutely.
Here at Top Coder. We were talking about head-to-head matchups earlier. Let's go to see some, I believe we have like a fantasy matchup that we can see here, probably between, we got W Laty versus Tourist. What do we see here, guys?
Well, so overall, W Laty is ranked higher than Tourist. But part of that is due to the fact that he's competed a lot more, so he's won a lot more contests up until now. You see 187 competitions versus 14. So you do want to ask the question of, how many times does experience play into that? Number of wins, number of top 10 finishes. Obviously, that speaks volumes. And he's been at the TCO every year for quite some time now.
Right. So yeah, the stats do seem a little bit skewed, but don't let that fool you. These
you
are
never
the top
know. Yeah.
2 favorites to win this, potentially.
I would say it's going to be one of these two, most likely. I've been wrong in the past, though, so you never know what's going to happen. I'm usually wrong.
That's what makes this exciting, though. You can never predict
you really can't.
who is going to win this thing. We do have W Laty here again, but this time against Tomarun.
You notice what's interesting here is the percentages break down a little bit differently. Tomarun, at least by these numbers, has a better percentage chance of beating W Laty head-to-head. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot because, again, it's just one day, it's one contest. But if you look at the overall rank, they're number 1 and 2 overall. And, 58 versus 187 competitions. Tomarun has done a lot more competitions. He's very seasoned with this. Okay. He's won several of them. He's been to the TCO finals before. You actually may remember him. He was on our live stream last year for discussing the marathon problem.
we do have the ability to check in on some of these members too, as well, and see what they're up to. But we do have now
Let's
another
take a look at
matchup.
one more, actually, before we get there. We have Mugarilio Newts. I guess I have been pronouncing that name.
You're very
You're
good.
doing
multiple
fantastic
years.
with that because I've been screwing it up for many years.
And Milanin. So here we go. We have 22% head-to-head if they were to go against each other. Right?
Yeah, so theoretically, it looks like Milanin is a stronger competitor than Magrulianut. But again, number of competitions doesn't necessarily shake out the same. You see that Magrulianut has less wins than Milanin, but more top 10 finishes. So he tends to be higher in the list. They've both been a TCO finalist 4 times, so the experience is probably going to be pretty similar. And if you look at their rating, they're not that far apart. That's certainly within striking distance of each other, that it wouldn't surprise me for that to go either way.
Yeah,
Feel free to disagree with me on
yeah,
that.
absolutely. I think any of the top 5 that we've seen can win this.
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to be really close. The other thing about these stats is some of the competitors haven't done many matches, so the statistics are not very reliable. And plus, this format is completely different to your normal format.
That's true,
so
yeah.
Some
variability.
Yeah, there's a lot of variability, and depending on the problem, anything can happen.
It also is a question of not just how many contests have they done, but which ones have they done. Because there are a variety of different contests we run throughout the year. Some of them are TCO specific,
Yeah.
some of them are for clients, some of them are purely for fun but are not necessarily specific to the TCO. So you ask the question of which of those competitions were they actually in, and that can make a huge difference too. Because the types of problems, the amount of time they've spent on them, whether or not there's any other financial motivations for how they perform in them, all plays into that. For a lot of our client work, there's big prize money during the year for some of these folks to get. So you're going to see a lot of higher finishes for the client work because you get paid for it, right?
While we're on the topic of Milanin, he's got an interesting strategy with when he submits, usually being one of the last to submit. Is there some strategy behind that?
Do you want to field this one? I can offer something also, but go ahead.
I think it's a good strategy, actually, because when you submit, you show everyone else what your score is. So that in itself is a big hint of possibly what you're doing, and that could help other competitors. Whereas if you hold your solution back and submit right at the end, then that doesn't happen. But the disadvantage, of course, of that, if you keep holding back, then you don't actually know how good your solution will perform when you do submit. So you kind of have to balance it out a bit. You don't want to.
Yeah, so like the example we were showing earlier that scored 83 points, for instance, is 83 points good or bad? And the importance of that is not just that you scored 83 points, but is that more or less than what everybody else scored on that same test? And when you actually do a submission, you're getting graded not just on how many points you get for each test case, but balanced out against how does that compare against everybody else for each test case. So if you look at the leaderboard, for instance, a score of 100 on the leaderboard would mean that you have the best score on every one of those test cases out of everyone, which is theoretically the kind of the local maximum. So for some competitors, they might say, you know what, I really want to know how I'm comparing against everybody else. The downside is, yes, that it does kind of give away your hand, shows your cards a little bit. But the upside is that it also, so here's actually the scoreboard now. You see, Tanzaku has 94.50 points. That means he's at or very near the highest score for almost every test case. So he's doing pretty well. And then everybody else is kind of scaled off of that, which means it looks like he's doing 20% better than anybody else is right now. So as I was saying, the disadvantage is you show a little bit about how good your solution is, but the advantage is if you do submit and you get a really low score, it tells you, wow, somebody's doing a whole lot better than I am. Maybe my approach isn't good. Maybe they're doing it a different way. Or if you're scoring really high compared to everybody else, you can think to yourself, great, I'm on the right track. I'm probably doing similar to how everybody else is. Of course, some competitors take exactly the opposite approach and they say, you know what, I'm just going to test locally, score as high as I can. Whatever my score is compared to everybody else is what it is, and it'll be what it is. Let the chips fall where they may. It's a philosophical decision for a lot of people.
Yes. So I guess when you're testing locally, you don't actually know what your score will be compared to other people.
Correct.
So you You only know your local score.
You know you've got 83 points for that,
83
but
points, but you don't know if that's
that good or bad?
So, yeah, the only way to find out is to actually submit and see how it compares. Should we talk about how the scoring works? Like the relative
go
scoring?
right ahead.
Right. So once everyone's submitted, for each test case, we compare their score against the best score achieved by anyone on that test case. So say they scored 50 points and the best is 100, then they'll get some percentage of that. So they'll get 0.5 of a point just for that test case. And then we sum up all the points for every test case, and that's their final score.
So that's how you get the score of 100 on the leaderboard, would theoretically mean you've got the best score for each test case. And that's theoretically, well, not theoretically, that is the highest score you can get on the leaderboard. That means you're winning every case, which rarely does it get that because, as I was mentioning earlier, there's variation in the different tests. So different strategies are sometimes going to perform better or worse. But seeing folks, above 90, 95 on the leaderboard, that means they're winning almost every test or very nearly winning almost every test.
Awesome. Let's actually take a look at some of the screens. I know a lot of our viewers are always interested on what they're doing on their screen, maybe pull some code. Let's take a look at Tenzaku since he's in the lead right now. He is a rookie, to remind you. This is his first time at TCO. So Tenzaku. What do you see here? What's he doing?
Okay, so you're putting us on the spot to try to look at and analyze his code very, very quickly, which
no problem. Just take your time.
No problem at all. Okay, so he is doing a fill type algorithm. I don't want to explain in more detail than that, because some competitors may be further along than others. I don't want to accidentally say too much that might give hints away.
Sure.
But he's basically, it looks like he's taking different regions of the board and trying to fill them for different players. He's got one window open with his code. He's got another window open where he's looking at basically scores on different test cases. You will sometimes see competitors kind of have their own little system they'll rig up where it will automatically run their tests and tell them if their new code is better or worse than their last one, things like this. So that anybody who's done this for a while certainly has experience with this kind of thing. We do provide a local tester for everyone. We kind of showed some of the example visualizations for that. You can run that without the visualization if all you care about is the score that you're getting. So what they will usually do, they obviously don't want to look at every single test case. They just want to know, how am I scoring on all these? So they'll script it out to automatically run those, scrape out their results, and some of them even have fancy spreadsheets that it generates for them, color-coded and everything else.
Everyone has their own approach.
That kind of thing.
It all helps.
It all helps.
Yeah.
Every couple minutes like that gives you more information about how you're doing. I can see it looks like in the back he does have the visualizer open for at least one of his cases. What the visualizer then tells you is it gives you a sense of, okay, well, why is this particular solution working good or bad? Okay. Or especially if you see maybe one case that's not working right, you can look at it, you can kind of get an idea of why. The picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Or, picture's worth 1,000 lines of code.
All right, let's move on to W. Leite, currently in second place, 11-time TCO finalist. Looks like he has one of those spreadsheet type things.
This is the spreadsheet. Yeah, this is one of those spreadsheet things I was telling you about. And hopefully we can fix the banner at the bottom. Yeah, so what he's got here is, you look across the top of his spreadsheet, and it shows actually the time he did each test run, and it's showing the individual test seeds he tried against. The green and red indicates whether it's better or worse than the last one he did.
Okay.
So when you see columns with a lot of green, it means overall his solution is better. When you see a lot of red, it means overall it's gotten worse.
Oh, I see.
Now, in reality, frequently you're seeing some green and some red because, the variety of the test cases, your strategy sometimes will work better on some things and not as good on others. And what's interesting about, I'm seeing on W. Leite's screen here, he's got all of his code from all the previous TCOs he's also got there. That way, if there's something he's tried in the past that he knows he's got something coded up for, he can pull it up, because I just happen to see...
So they're allowed to do this?
Absolutely. Any of their code that's their own, they're allowed to use. That's totally fine. Yeah, I just happened to catch the forest fire problem from 2014, which was one of my favorites. I happened to write that one.
Very cool.
But yeah, I can't tell at a quick glance what exactly he's doing on here, but he's obviously got a lot of utility code trying to see which pieces are attacking each other, which ones aren't. He's got a whole lot of nasty looking commented out code that kind of scares me. So although he is formatting his code very well, format and code style is not what gets you points in these rounds. Okay. So as time goes on, you'll see that this gets nastier and nastier usually. Almost obfuscated looking and very hard to understand what they're doing.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, once we check back in a little bit later, I'm sure we'll be seeing some of that.
It's going to look very interesting, I think, yeah.
It's a really impressive ability to keep everything straight in their heads as they pull this together.
Yes, and in fact, back in the days when we used to actually have everybody come out and eat meals together, they would say nothing to each other the entire time. Heads would be down, they'd be writing on their notepads, and it was just like, it was weird. It was actually kind of disturbing. But hey, it's part of it, right?
But at the same time, I've noticed they have huge respect for each other. So there's
absolutely.
great sportsmanship, and like yesterday, I was having dinner with them, and they all being really friendly, chatting to each other. I mean, I think they're all friends anyway.
For sure.
It's only when it comes down to competition where they sit down and just focus on
I love
the problem.
that too. I mean, we're a top coder community, right? I mean, no one has like ill will toward another.
Not at all.
It's gamesmanship, and
Well, as soon as this competition ends, they're going to be talking to each other, sharing their code. They're going to be pulling out their laptops and trying things together, and they're probably.
Like, what was your approach? What was it?
And they're going to show notes and be like, "No, did you try that? Oh, why didn't I think of that?" As to whether or not they talk with Dimitri or I, it's going to depend on how much they like the problem and how they feel about things.
Yeah.
They're either going to be our best friend or they're going to hate us.
Yeah, they hate us, but
Let's go over to our Romanian. Or let's check the scoreboard real quick, actually.
I'm wondering. Yeah, the scoreboard.
we have a new leader. So Nika has 97 points.
Okay, that's.
So that's a huge.
So he's
jump
representing Georgia pretty nicely there.
Let's see what Nika's doing.
I believe that was Nika's first submission. Nika was one of the ones who
That's
hadn't
true.
submitted
He did
prior,
not
so
submit
first
yet.
submission
We're
coming in at the
almost
top.
3 hours into this, so he was spending some time doing the math and quietly thinking about what he wanted to do first.
Okay. Nika's been here a few times as well.
He has.
7 times.
7
counting,
times
yeah.
at the TCO finals. That's impressive.
So this is his 4th marathon match final. But
Is it? Okay.
But he must have done.
Oh, he must
some
have, like,
algorithms.
competed somewhere
He's
else.
done algo
Algorithms
before also,
finals.
yes.
So he's a very well-rounded coder, definitely.
We're not the only ones checking the scoreboard apparently right now. Nika checking in as well, probably looking for the latest submission score to post.
Yeah.
Another fan favorite that we frequently see, not at the top of the leaderboard right now, is Taurus. I think it would be great to move over and take a look at what Taurus is doing, because every competition that we have, there's always a contingent of fans that like to
Oh,
follow
yeah, they're always
along.
tuning in, seeing what tourists.
So I'm looking quickly and I see that his last submission for Tourist was over an hour ago now. So just
Okay.
because you see him in 5th on the leaderboard right now doesn't mean a thing. He could very well locally have a bunch of stuff going on, and he could be sitting on a solution that's much better than
That's right.
than what the scoreboard is indicating.
I know.
I would be very surprised if he hasn't made progress.
Yeah. Expect the unexpected from Tourist. I mean, he's a very well-seasoned professional, and he wins a lot of competitions, not just Top Coder, but all over the
Right,
place.
yeah.
He's won Google Code Jams 6 times in a row.
Oh my gosh.
Which
doesn't
just
surprise
insane.
anyone.
He's won the IOI with the most gold medals.
Do you know when he started? Like, did he start as soon as he was allowed to?
I think he must have been like 12 or 13.
Oh
He
my.
started really young, and actually at the start he couldn't come to the finals because you have to be 18 and older.
Yeah.
Yep.
So they gave some breathing space for the other competitors because Tourist couldn't
It
come.
didn't last long.
But yeah, now that he's here, he's definitely a force to be reckoned with.
I'm also noticing he's the first coder we've seen so far who is using a coding environment that's not black and white. So that's kind of exciting. That's pretty. Easier on the eyes too.
I also know he's very good with his time management, so he uses every second available to him. You know, he will think about the problem and then he will code and think some more, and then so he's always got time to make that final winning submission. So definitely don't rule him out.
The one thing you will find with him potentially, though, I've definitely seen it in Algo. I can't recall if I've seen it in Marathon. When it starts to get down to the wire on time, if he's struggling at all and starting to get frustrated, you'll start seeing him walking around pacing, kind of doing things with his fingers in the air. And like you can almost imagine he's working on like an invisible abacus or something. But his emotions do get to him sometimes.
Always.
And really, all competitors have that happen to some extent.
Yeah.
If you're spending 8-9 hours thinking about one problem and it's just consuming you and you can't think about it anymore, you start to go a little bit nuts, and it's very, very frustrating.
He is known to walk around.
Very much so. He's probably more so than anyone else that I can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure
the blood
we'll
moving.
be seeing. We may need a tourist cam later in the afternoon.
Yeah.
To just follow him around as he paces back and forth on the floor.
Well, just realistically, from an ergonomic standpoint, sitting in that chair for several hours at a time does not do your body any favors. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this, but like professional gamers, for instance, they actually do physical workouts to be able to sit for hours at a time without getting uncomfortable. I suspect some of these guys probably could take a lesson from them.
Oh, that's going to be a good post-match question. What was your workout routine leading up to the marathon match? I'm sure we'll get a lot of great
I mean,
ones for that.
and as we all know at this point, these members they come from all around the world. I was speaking to tourists yesterday, and he mentioned how he was staying up till like 5 a.m. his time just to be ready for competition, because he only came in yesterday. So he's like, all right, well, tomorrow I have to compete. You don't want to be jet lagged during your marathon competition.
I think that's a really big part of the preparation, getting enough sleep, enough water, enough food, and just being mentally ready for the problem, so it's not just your pure skills.
If they were really on their game, they would have been messaging with Jesse leading up to this to see what snacks and drinks would be offered here and subsist on a diet of only that for a week leading up to it, just so their body is prepared as well.
Very good.
Let's go ahead and check in on some more competitors here. Let's go over to Romania's Muguriliunuț. He was up on the leaderboard there a little bit earlier, currently in 4th. Looks like he's chugging away.
Yeah, he's clearly got some scripts and stuff to help him with his testing. Unfortunately, he's covering up his code window, so I can't make much sense of what he's actually doing.
Getting
some errors.
Oh, there you go. He heard you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, question about the scripts and the tooling. Do the competitors create these on the fly as they go, or do they come in prepared with some tools to compile their...
Competitors worth their salt at this level probably have these all ready to go, because they've used them either from previous years or from previous competitions they've done. So once you make it here, you're definitely no stranger to how to run these things efficiently.
So we do have a number of new competitors in the marathon match this year. We actually have 5 people who are competing in their first TCO. Could those competitors be at a disadvantage because they don't have that experience and have tools like that in place already?
Well, if they've thought about it, they may have already put those tools together. They may have watched previous live streams and talked with other competitors and gotten a sense for how to do this kind of stuff. Again, if they've done their homework, well, just like with a professional sporting event, you have the coaches bring in game tape from the other teams that you're going to be playing against, right? So you would want to figure out what kind of strategies are people using to succeed. And where we do say that these competitors really are very friendly once the competition is over, they're happy to talk about what they do with each other, and many of them have even shared some of their tooling and some of their approaches on that with each other. So most of them probably have a lot of this in their back pocket already, even if it's their first time officially on site.
Yeah, that's a really good point about sharing. I mean, after each marathon match, everyone talks about how they approach the problem, how they solved it, what code they've used, what they've tried.
The forum post officially needs to be called Post Your Approach.
Yeah.
And then people start just talking about what they did. And
actually, that's probably the most useful part of the competition, where you get to learn a lot about, how do others approach the problem, and what can I do next time that will be better and that will help me to get a better score.
That's how you grow and how you really learn. They say you're not going to learn by only looking at people who do the same thing as you. You learn by looking at people who are smarter than you or who do things a different way.
Right.
So it's a great opportunity. And sometimes you're the smarter one, sometimes you're not. You can always learn from everybody else with a different approach.
Absolutely.
Let's check in on one of our new competitors this year. How about we swing over to En from Japan coming in to this competition. Coming in ranked at 30th overall with no wins on the year, but a number of top 10 finishes.
Okay. And he's doing a forum question, which I'm hoping actually one of the people who's not on the stream right now might be able to answer. Maybe Harshit could answer that for us. Thank you.
He's got that under control.
Okay. Yeah, we have our production van sitting at another table right within earshot of us, so that kind of makes this nice. The only downside of us being on the stream right now is Dimitri and I are theoretically the primary points of contact for questions about the problem. So
At any given moment, our subject matter experts could be pulled away if a competitor has a good question.
That is true. And I got 7 hours left.
although realistically, most of the clarifications about the question itself would have come within probably the first 5 minutes. But by this point, it's hopefully safe to assume they understand the question, what they're trying to do.
Right. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, because we kept the problem pretty simple, and I'm hoping people can understand it quite quickly and get on with it. But there could still be some technical issues.
There could be.
With the visualizer, or how to run things.
In fact, we did have a very small glitch with the visualizer that we fixed pretty quickly
We
on.
did.
But these things happen.
And no one even noticed.
No one even noticed. That's great.
I think that's a real win.
Well, you know what some competitors do is we provide the source for the offline tester, the visualizer. Some of them will actually modify it to tie into their scripts, so they may not have even been using the version we provided. So maybe that's why we didn't. Maybe that's why we didn't even see anybody reporting the issue.
Yeah.
Let's jump around to a couple other desks, check in with another TCO first-time competitor. How about we head over to Diver19? Did I say that right, Nick?
You did.
All right.
Ooh, nice.
Well done.
Coming in from Ukraine. So 1 win on the year coming up into this competition, 9 top 10 finishes.
41 competitions. So even though he's a bit lower rated, a little bit lower rank, he's been doing this a lot, so he knows what he's doing. So that's where you get some of the randomness of, does he have a good aha moment on this, or does this problem just resonate with him well? We'll have to see what happens. It's very tough to read what he's doing when he's scrolling so quickly, but let's see. Trying to grok a little bit about what he's doing here. I have no idea what he's doing just based upon what I'm seeing here. I apologize.
All right, let's go on over to Tomaroon. Tomaroon, he's ranked number 2, right behind W Lati this year.
Okay, so he's looking at the left of his screen. He's clearly got a script that's running a couple of test cases for him, so that just makes things a little bit quicker for him. I can't see his code on the right-hand side, so I'm not sure exactly what he's doing just yet. But if he moves his windows around or does any excuse me. Okay, so he's looking over some of his results. You notice he calls his output file res00.txt. So he's probably saving all of his different output files. Oh, and he's got a Ruby script called analyze. So he's got something that's actually doing some analysis and telling him how his solutions are doing after he runs them each time. I don't know exactly what his analysis is doing, but it's probably telling him if he thinks it's going to be better or worse than the previous one. Probably some very basic statistical analysis, looking at how many test cases are better or worse.
So I noticed that the Tomaroon here is in Sublime text, writing code, and what else do we have here? IntelliJ. Every competitor has different tools.
Of course.
And different languages they're comfortable with. Are there any advantages or disadvantages that come up using any of these tools?
There are. Do you have any thoughts you want to jump in? I feel like I'm monopolizing the conversation on you.
I think also personally for me, I want to use tools that I'm familiar with. So I like Sublime Editor because it gives you nice coloring and compilation and all that. And I use Java, but many people use C++ because it's faster than Java.
Yep.
So that can make a difference in your score.
Absolutely, yeah.
So because faster coding languages will execute more instructions and
you can do
and then
more
you
math.
can do more math and get a higher score. But for me, the key is to use something you're really familiar with and that you know well.
Yeah, the performance differences between the different languages and stuff are not going to be enough to make up for your skill and your comfort level. But for those folks who've been doing this for a while, most do use C++, not everyone, obviously. I think we've got 2 or 3 competitors doing Java this time.
I mean, in other competitions that are like a longer-based competitions, you might want to use Python just because it's such a nice language. Like it's easy to write Python. It's really quick to see what you're doing, but it is very slow.
It's
in
slower by a factor of almost 10.
Yeah, so
compared to
that
the other
makes
languages.
a huge difference, and a lot of our top competitors don't use don't use Python for marathon matches for that reason.
I think you
interesting.
probably won't see it used at all during the algorithm matches either.
Yeah.
Again, where speed is so critical there.
Very cool.
Okay, so we're looking at Sullyper now, and he's clearly got some nice automated tooling doing all sorts of fun stuff. Oh, and we've even got a nice visualization.
Our first visualization. Timestamp that on the stream.
So
looks cool.
I'm going to be careful how much detail
about this?
I'm going to be careful how much detail I say, because I don't want to accidentally say anything that might give something away. But the idea is he's trying to place as many queens as possible, and then surrounding them in such a way to prevent those queens from attacking the other players.
Yeah, and during testing, we thought this could be a really good strategy. You know, you want to neutralize the queens, you surround them by lower scoring pieces,
Yep.
and that way the queens, who are the highest scoring pieces, they give you a lot of points without actually attacking enemy pieces.
This whole time I was thinking you only get one piece of each.
You get as many of
You
each
can-
piece as you
Oh,
want.
place as
interesting,
many as
okay.
you want. So that's a good strategy that we actually thought about, and it looks like a lot of, or some of the competitors are already using this.
Correct.
Which is very impressive.
Given the number of queens you can densely pack in that way, I'd be very surprised if there's a greatly different approach that's going to work better. I'm not up there with them, so I could very well be proven wrong. But I did notice that the way this particular implementation was working, using different pieces and stuff, is a little bit different than what we had thought about, and maybe has some subtle variations. I don't want to say in more detail than that, because that could give stuff away, but I'm glad to see there's room for iteration and improvement on that.
I'm sure one of our past competitors, Saiho, probably thought of something like that. Would have thought of something like that as well, huh? He actually stopped competing last year. He was not in the competition. It kind of, I feel like, made room for others to kind of shine. What are your thoughts on that, Dimitri?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Saiho was a star at this competition. He won, I don't know how many,
A lot.
A lot, yeah,
three
a
or
lot.
four.
More than that.
He was really fast and a really good coder. But it seems like he's kind of achieved what he wanted to achieve, and you know he's moved on from top coder. He's got a good job in OpenAI now, and he probably doesn't have as much time to compete anymore.
Right.
Well, the other thing is, you did mention it did open up the competition, definitely. You know, it gives more chances to other people to do well. But at the same time, for the community, it's a huge loss
For sure.
to see Saiho go
Right.
and just not be with us and sharing his ideas and code.
And I know, Will, you've had some experiences with Saiho yourself, some interesting conversations.
Oh, I've had plenty of interesting conversations, many of them behind this desk in front of this microphone. He was definitely a character, a lot of fun to have around. He competed very hard, a very humble guy. I was always shocked by how humble he was, about how brilliant his solutions were, and he would say, no, that's simple. And I couldn't even begin to comprehend it. But never was arrogant or full of himself
Right.
about it. He always just said, this is how my brain works, and that's
He had
how
his
it
way of
goes.
doing things, and it worked really well. And he had kind of a script in his head that he would always follow. He'd try the basic solution, then he would try the random solution, then he'd try various different levels of the dummy solutions, until he finally stumbled upon something that kind of worked for him. And I agree, it is kind of a loss to the community in a sense that he's not here, but he is doing some bigger and better things. Many of the competitors I do remain somewhat social with outside of Top Coder. He's one of them. And I actually talked to him when he decided not to compete. And the way he explained it to me, he's like, well, I've been doing it for a while. I've been very successful. Eventually, I'm going to have to stop. And I just kind of got to the point where maybe now's as good a year as any to just let somebody else do it and I can move on to other things.
Well, if you're watching to see what the problem is, Saiho, we miss you. Hope everything's going well.
Yeah, like you said, many conversations with him behind this desk, or at the other desks, or behind a bar, various different places. There's been a lot of good conversations that have happened.
Yeah, he's definitely a character, and he brings a lot of cool things to the competition.
I think everyone does in their own way, because you do get, when you get people that are kind of off the bell curve, very, very smart, you get some interesting personalities. If you've ever seen, there's been various movies and TV shows that sort of make fun of people like us. Some of them exaggerate it, some of them not so much. But yeah, I think a lot of very interesting people to hang out with and really learn stuff from.
Yeah, I think they're really cool people, but they also, you know, they're still normal people. Like
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
social. They play sports. They play games. They have, you know, partners and wives outside of this.
yeah.
So they have their own jobs. You
Yeah,
know,
it's really amazing.
so
They
this
can go
is
from,
just a small part of
it really is.
their life, but they love it. They keep coming back.
Hey, the fact that I'm still here, I still love it too. And you've
Yeah.
been here before, and I'm sure you'll be
Yeah.
here again.
Definitely, this is the place to be.
All right. Well, one person in that place, another TCO first timer, is Kaasan.
Gossip.
Kaasan?
Gossip.
Kaasan.
I almost
yeah.
had it.
He's been a frequent competitor in SRMs for many years now. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does reasonably well just based upon his algorithmic and mathematical skills. But then again, you balance that against the experience with marathons and see where that kind of leaves him.
So an interesting statistic about Gasson and Saliper is they've only had 10 or less, 10 and 9 competitions each, which is the lowest number out of anyone. So they're the new kids on the block, but they've been competing really well recently. So you know anything is possible.
Yeah, with such a small sample size, making your way to this competition, they must have performed very well.
Yeah, they did really well, and I'm sure they do other competitions, you know, to keep themselves fit.
And I think we have one last screen to show everybody. ATS,
Okay.
who competed last year at TCO19.
Yeah, I'm taking a look, trying to grok quick what he's doing there. Gonna show my stupidity and the fact that I have no idea what he's doing just based upon what I'm seeing. He's obviously doing some sort of a search space over some strategy and trying to find the maximum, but I'm not sure exactly what his strategy is.
Interesting fact, he's the, I guess the youngest top coder in the sense that he joined in 2015. Everyone else joined a little bit later than he did.
Okay.
So,
That doesn't necessarily mean he's a stranger to programming competition, though. That could simply be that he just never found Top Coder or perhaps was too young
True.
to join Top Coder. He very well might have done IOI or things like this previously. I don't know that for sure. I don't know if we have that information available. I'm guessing probably not.
So, I find it interesting that a lot of coders are still using English in their code, you know, even if English is not their first language of choice. So it seems to be like,
So I think a lot of
Amazing.
that, a lot of that falls out from the fact that your reserved words and your statements in just about every language are English based. That's sort of U.S. dominance in the technology space, I
right,
guess.
Right.
Yeah, but you will see a lot of our competitors. It's not as easy to see right here, but they certainly switch the language and stuff on their machine setup to their own locale. So you'll see like the menu bars and the headers and stuff. You won't be able to read what it is half the time.
Yeah. I think I saw Gasson, he was using something like Google Translate to translate
Yep.
the
problem.
problem
Very
statement
frequently
into
happens.
Japanese. So yeah, that should help him.
Yeah, it looks like just at a glance here, he's clearly done some custom stuff with his tester because it's outputting a lot more stuff than what the tester we provided does. So again, he's tweaked things to be the way he wants to kind of optimize his time. Do we have any interesting updates on the leaderboard?
Aladdin
Not yet.
submitted.
Actually, yeah, we do. Let's jump over to the leaderboard where we can see that we have a submission in from Millinan. He must have heard us saying that he had a strategy for submitting late
Yeah.
and decided to
He's
post
like,
it
yeah,
in.
maybe I'll
It's
switch it
very
up.
unusual.
Making
isn't
liars
it?
out of us. So there's two interesting things I see here is that near the top you do have a couple of folks doing pretty well, but there is still a good distribution in the scores nonetheless, which credit to you, Dimitri, means that the problem is well written in such a way that it's not everybody's able to almost perfectly solve it and fight for the last 3%. It's actually, there's a variety of strategies and approaches that are really making a big difference for people here. We are a little over 3 hours into this now, so we're kind of starting to see some of these things shake out.
Yeah, absolutely. My biggest worry was the problem will be too easy and, you know, a lot of people will get perfect hundreds, but it looks like this is not the case. So, yeah, that's really good. It means there's still room for improvement. There's still things they can do to do better.
Perhaps we can get a look at some of the visualizers. That's always fun to see, especially now that we've made it very colorful. I think we have a screen. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
I think it's a little
Example
PowerPoint slide. That
Yeah, it's basically just slides showing each of the first 10 examples, first 10 test cases using the provided example solution, which doesn't do anything super intelligent, but it gives you an idea of how the problem looks.
Okay.
You can see the grayed out spaces are the various walls that have been placed, so some chessboards have a lot of open space, others are very, very walled off.
You mentioned that the knight can hop over them.
Yeah, just like in regular chess, a knight can hop, whereas queens, rooks, bishops, etc. Cannot move through a wall.
And they cannot attack through a wall. as
Correct.
well. So this solution is very basic. It's just putting kings of different colors sort of far away from each other so they don't attack each other. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement.
King is also, of course, the lowest scoring piece, so this is definitely not a good solution by any means.
Right.
The idea is it just provides something so that competitors have something to get started with. That way, when you're first trying to compile, make sure that everything is in the right format to be able to submit it. You've got something to work with. And you can see the different colors represent the different players. And you can see how in different test cases, each piece is worth a different number of points. So the selection of which pieces you're going to use is going to vary based upon that. You want to optimize based upon... let's see, if we can actually maybe pull... If we can
show
pull
the
over
iPad.
to the iPad we've got here, we can actually kind of walk through some of what we've got.
Great.
So we can show a really good solution. So this is a solution that I found with hill climbing for the first seed. So the first seed is usually the smallest grid. It's just 8 by 8 and only 4 players. So here you can see that the score is 229, which is player 2, the lowest scoring player, and there is still a bit of variety. So, for example, where the red player is, there's some space there, and it's not completely filled up with queens. So I find that quite interesting. And there's a blue rook, which is not connected.
Yeah, it looks
to
like just kind of
anything
floating
else,
out there.
just floating around. So it looks like it's not enough to just do a simple flood fill anywhere.
Yeah, a little
from
bit
the
of
corners.
a little bit of nuance is definitely necessary.
You probably still need to move pieces around, especially around the borders where they can attack each other.
Yeah, because if you see some of these pieces, you've got these 3 rooks that are kind of near the middle.
Right.
None of them is able to attack anything else diagonally, because rooks, of course, only move horizontally and vertically.
Mm-hmm.
So you evaluate, what could I do with them? Could I make, just a simple solution I'm seeing, turn that blue rook into a purple, and you've got a few more points for purple. Of course, you're losing a few points for blue, so that might not be as good of an idea, but just these little things like that, and you want to actually have a solution that tests those things. Could that make it better?
Yeah, that's right. And the other interesting thing is, can you get a good balance of scores between each player? Because obviously, if they all balance, then the lowest scoring will be a good score.
Yeah, you don't want a situation where one player is scoring very high, because it won't really help you.
That's right. So
While Dimitri's pulling something up here, I do want to just, first of all, thank all of our viewers who are watching right now. And note, if you guys have questions for Erin and Dimitri, please post them in the chat.
Yeah, definitely.
We would, you should definitely take advantage of having some really talented and smart people available.
That's fine.
Nick and I sure are. You guys should all get the opportunity too.
So what we have here on the screen is an example flood fill solution where you have queens, like a big region of queens surrounded by other pieces, so the queens are basically neutralized. But even this solution still has some room for improvement, because you notice there's some small patches in the middle that are probably better if you merge them with the bigger regions. And also there's a disbalance between the player scores. So if you look here, the lowest scoring is 42161, but the highest is 47293. So there's still around 5,000 points that you want to take from the highest scoring player and kind of share them
So
around.
that's potentially a difference of as many as 10 queens that you could move around to make some difference.
So I think towards the end of the competition, it will come down to this to make this final optimizations just to get the most points out of your solution.
At a glance, we do have a couple of competitors that have solutions kind of along this line, not identical to this, but certainly this is a very strong early solution for the problem. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of kind of iterations and variations on this basic idea.
Let's check in on the scoreboard real quick.
Yeah.
See if we have any more submissions. I think we have.
So Kaasan and WLate, they're waiting for their solutions to score, as is Tenzaku. So we'll have to see where they come out. It does take a few minutes for the score to kind of for the solution to kind of run through the bowels of the system, get scored, and then calculate against the other scores.
All right, so in a few minutes we can expect to see scores for everyone except our last two who haven't submitted yet. All right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if Diver19 and ATS are perhaps just waiting for their submissions, or maybe they're struggling on the problem. I don't know for sure.
Maybe they're copying Milanin's
They
approach?
could be. They could be taking the...
Milanin of years past.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, before Milanin, it was Pilo used to do the same thing, where he would quietly sit and do the math for all until the last half an hour of the competition. He'd have all sorts of sheets of paper and all sorts of stuff on his screen, but wouldn't submit anything, wouldn't say anything to anyone. Then he'd just submit something. Yeah, maybe he'd come in second, third, fourth, whatever, but whatever he was, and he was happy with that.
Now, I'd like to bring up the fact that Marathon has changed on our platform.
It has.
In this past
I was
year.
wondering if you were going to ask about that.
Yeah, so let's talk about that a little bit. What do you think? How are people reacting? Is there room for improvement?
I'll attempt to give the first shot at this. I'll go on record and say yes, we know people haven't necessarily been happy about that. But at the same time, it was necessary to make that change because we found issues in the old platform, issues with security, issues with reliability. We weren't going to be able to continue running on that anymore, unfortunately. And believe me, Dimitri and I were as sad as everybody else that we couldn't keep using it. We were very used to it. It was nice. It did what it did good, but it's just not the way of the future. What we've got now gives us a lot more flexibility. We are actively developing on it and actively working to improve it. It really has come a long way, especially over this summer, where we got kind of from the infancy, sort of shook out a lot of what we needed with it.
Great.
The ability to actually submit solutions that have more than just the basic libraries and things like this are coming. We potentially could add other languages if we wanted. Not making a promise that we're going to, but there's a lot more things we can do. We've got that flexibility now. It's a lot more secure, which is obviously kind of the big thing. You hear all these huge data breaches and things like this. We don't want somebody doing something stupid. So we're getting there. It's not where we want to be necessarily, but at least we're not where we were. So
yeah, definitely getting there. And for the members out there, just want to say, stick with us because the problems will still be good and still be interesting, and the platform will get there. And it's we're working on it. It's going to get better, and just stick around. Don't leave us.
Yeah. The ability to use kind of our offline testers and run with the problem locally too. That's no different than it was before. And for marathon competitors, especially, 90% of it is what you do offline on your own before you do the submission. So a lot of that is going to be still pretty much the same.
Yeah, so you said the problems are still going to be good. They've been good historically over the years. Do you guys have some favorite problems that you shared over the years? I feel like Aaron spoiled the answer to that earlier.
Maybe a little bit, but would you like to share one, Dimitri? If not, I can certainly offer a few.
Pretty much every problem I've solved has been really good. Thank you, Aaron, and other writers.
If you like them, then yes, you can thank me. If you didn't like them, it was probably somebody else.
So obviously I like my problems, but there's no point talking about them. But I guess over the years, my favorites have been more like simulation type problems. So there was a problem with zombies. So you had to place, there's zombies walking around a map, and you have to place cannons that shoot the zombies and kill zombies, and you get points for that. So I found that really interesting. But there were other problems that were more sort of mathematical, more theoretical. So there was one about finding poisoned wine bottles, and I was solving this competition, and I actually didn't do so well, but I just loved the problem, and I loved it so much that I spent another probably 6 months working on the problem, on the actual theoretical part of it. And yeah, it was really interesting research problem, and people are still publishing papers about it.
Yeah, what's interesting about that problem, it was based, I was the writer, so I'll admit that, so this is not to stroke my own back or anything, but it was based upon a classic kind of riddle problem. Is you have 10 rats and 1,000 bottles of wine, one of which is poisoned. You can give samples of wine to any of the rats, and you have enough time to wait to see if one of the rats dies before drinking the wine. How do you do it so that you can figure out for sure which bottle is poisoned? And the answer to it is actually kind of a binary counting method, where the selections of wine you give to each rat are based upon base 2, but for 10 digits, because that gives you 1,024 possibilities. You see which rat dies, and that tells you exactly which combination of rats die. Basically, is a binary readout of which bottle number is poisoned. Well, I had a discussion with a coworker once who actually put forth a question: how does it change if you have 2 bottles of wine that are poisoned? And I'm like, ooh, now this gets interesting. So I extended it further. I said, what if you have not only more than 1 bottle of wine that's poisoned, but what if you have the ability to do more than 1 test? Kind of generalize the problem a little bit. Where does that get you? Is there a good way to do this? And in fact, you get into some interesting math with matrices, with groups of related bottles of wine, with linking, with information theory of how many can you narrow it down to, because you can't solve it perfectly at that point. So that's where you get a lot of these interesting research papers and stuff, and it really is a very well-studied problem. It was in the simple version to begin with, but the more generalized version gives sort of a whole lot of fun things to talk about. Yeah, if I were to say, from my perspective on favorite problems, any of the things that rely heavily on mathematics and probability, that's sort of what I usually go to, just because I like math and probability, and anybody who's been competing for a while knows if there's some sort of a probability thing, there's a good chance I wrote it. It's just what I like. Sometimes the problems come from real-world things we've faced, where we sort of take a classic puzzle and see if we can find a way to make it more general. Because then you get kind of, as I was saying about today's problem, the variance in the test cases, and the small and the big, the complex and the simple. That's what sort of makes it a fun problem to solve.
And we were just told that the problem that you were describing is now in the chat. So if you go there, there's a link to that specific problem.
Oh, fantastic!
If you want to go check that out. We are running close to time here. I think we can look at the leaderboard,
we are.
maybe just to see where we are going to end up here, just for now. Looks like we got Nico on top.
Well, for now, but Tenzaku, Gassen, or WLAT could easily overthrow him when the solutions are done processing. So we'll have to kind of see what happens.
Unfortunately, we don't have an estimate on when those will be in, so we may be off air when those first submissions do get completed with their testing. But you'll be able to follow along at the latest update later tonight when we come back on the air to cover the end of the marathon finals competition.
Yes, if you want to tune into the marathon, that'll be at 7 p.m.
Who are we going to have with us for that?
For that one, we'll have Milanin and Diver.
Okay,
They'll
excellent.
be on with us.
And Aaron and Dimitri will be joining us again.
Yeah, we'll be back again to get more of
I
this.
thought that was,
Let's make extra sure that's clear.
Of course. But you definitely need to tune in at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. is when our official kickoff begins. We're going to have a red carpet event. We're gonna have a bunch of members coming on through and saying hi, and we hope to see you guys there. Dimitri, Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for the
breaking news real quick before we sign off.
What's
Nick,
that?
I've just been informed that we're going to keep the leaderboard running on this page
For a little
while
bit
we are
longer.
off air. So if you want to keep track of where the marathon competitors are,
great.
keep the stream open. Feel free to converse in the chat. I'm sure we'll have someone there as well talking about it. And we will be back later tonight. 6 p.m. Central Time is the formal kickoff of our broadcast in the Red Carpet Show as the finalists join us. We'll then be covering the end of the marathon finals, and then moving on to the Top Coder Open 2019 welcome reception and the parade of finalists, where you can meet all of the competitors across all of the tracks.
If you want to look forward into the schedule, just go to our TCO19 site. We have an on-site events tab at the top. Check that out. View the live broadcast schedule there. All right, until then, we will see you. Have a good one.
Take
Thank
it
you
easy.
for watching.
Thank you. Bye bye.